This is the Non-Tech Podcast, conversations about education, technology, and culture, with Dr. Doug Reed and Dr. Matt Stranick. Thank you for joining us.
My name is Dr. Doug Reed, and I am located in Abagway, the traditional and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people.
My name is Dr. Matthew Stranick, and I am located in Menakwisk in St. John, New Brunswick, which is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqiyik Maliseet people. Well, hey there, one and all. Welcome to the Non-Tech Podcast, episode number 92. It is, in fact, our first episode of 2026. And as per custom, we're doing a bit of a retrospective. We're taking a look back at 2025, taking a slightly different tack on our historically awesome Flotsam, Derelict, Lagan, and Jetsam theme. I may have the order on that just a little bit off, but it is open to interpretation after all. I am Matt Stranick. This is Dr. Doug Reed. We're very pleased to have you with us. Doug, how are things? It's been a few weeks. I hope the holidays treated you well. I hope 2026 is treating you okay so far.
Yeah, the holidays were awesome. I love those days when you don't know what day it is. That is my favorite time of year, where it's
100%.
just, okay, it's another day. I wonder if that's what being retired is like.
I was just thinking perhaps so. Yeah, looking forward to finding out one of these years, but probably not this year, probably not next as far as it goes.
Yeah, that's this year's not it, and next year's not looking good. Yeah. Absolutely. So other than that, doing pretty okay. I'm over a couple of migraines. We had some crazy barometric pressure shifts here in PEI, and that's when I get migraines. So
Dang.
I got hammered a little bit. So I was a little whiny, which is why this topic today is slightly different than what we've done in previous seasons. Because
absolutely, Doug. And as always, we appreciate the personal context for what we have going on with the topic. And so why don't we, from the Google document or some other mechanism, why don't you give us a bit of a rundown here on exactly what the topic is and how we may be differentiating from past versions of the same theme?
Sure. This year we have the New Year's wrap-up, Derelict, Lagan, Jetsam, and Flotsam Take 4, the happy version. And I often, when I put my notes together, I'm focused on whatever struck my fancy throughout the year. Because when we talk, right, we leave stuff. It's like, oh, yeah, we should come back to that. Well, that's what we do. And with the way my migraine was this week and with the way social media was in 2025 and the state of the world and all that, I said, nope, it's going to be the happy version. I am looking for the happy version of everything. So for listeners, once a year we do this, and I still love the fact that one of these 4 words I didn't know before the podcast. So Flotsam, goods that floated to the surface and may be reclaimed from a shipwreck. Jetsam, goods jettisoned and abandoned. Derelict, goods sank to the bottom and abandoned. And Lagan are goods sank to the bottom and tethered by a marker to be potentially recovered. So those 4 terms, because we normally just say Flotsam and Jetsam, and nobody ever really talks about Lagan. And I love that. But for me, Flotsam is what I want to look at this year. This because may be reclaimed, right? It's like that's the happiest. If there's a shipwreck, that's the happiest of the 4 options. So let's take a look. That's what we're doing.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And this is, in fact, the entry point for year 4 of the podcast series. We're on the pretty significant, where I think we may reach the point where we get to episode 100 by the end of this season, which is a significant milestone in and of itself. Certainly, we've covered a whole lot of ground. We've covered a whole lot of different topics over these past few years. And I like kind of having this inbuilt checkpoint system, as it were, to kind of consolidate, review, take a look at things from a slightly enlivened perspective. You could even, at this point, potentially after this episode, even do a meta episode of the Derelict, Lagan, Jetsam, and Flotsam episodes and review what we have, in fact, reviewed over the years for higher level and higher order analysis, which is all in keeping with the constructionist and or constructivist approaches to teaching and learning, which we have historically advocated for on the show. So it's not just coming out of left field. It's not just a greatest hits and or greatest misses. It's part of the ongoing quality control endeavor, you could say, from a instructional design standpoint, but it is also an opportunity for contextualization and growth to improve and move things forward in a good way, closing out the last year properly, entering a new year while we're still relatively early on, where we have the fewest amount of mistakes at this point in the year that there will be at any point during the year, as a matter of fact. So with that said, Doug,
with that said,
why don't we...
You just sent me down another path. If this was ADDIE, if this was like the instructional design process, we would be in evaluation mode. The
Absolutely.
E at the end of ADDIE, which so often gets ignored. It's very few processes actually include the evaluation. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. I never thought about that before. So I appreciate it. And yet
it's such a vital part of any kind of viable educational endeavor. I've been through all kinds of job interviews over the years for positions and the like, where people ask, well, what instructional design models are you familiar with? Do you like? Have you used? And for me, really, for all the kind of challenges or cliches you can point to the ADDIE model, I really like it because it has that inbuilt component where you have to take a serious look at what's come before and review it, right? To see what worked, what didn't work, where you can stand to improve. And in just about any educational setting, very often these programs and initiatives, I dare say particularly within the sphere of ed tech and curriculum, it's possible where you bring out these changes, you implement these projects, but then, as you say, Doug, you don't necessarily do the follow-up necessary to find out if the desired objectives were in fact achieved or how to improve for a long term. It's sort of like, well, that worked or that didn't, so let's get rid of it or let's move on to the next, as the case may be, right? So my master's degree level major was instructional design. I had the opportunity to teach an instructional design course at the graduate level for a few years in an online setting, and that aspect of the educational enterprise is always kind of in the back of my mind, right? It's not just a matter of whether it's effective or not, but how well do these programs serve their intended recipients, the students, the people who are meant to be on the front line. How well can instructors find ways to engage with these interventions and the like? So, the old ADDIE model serves as a kind of background gambit, if you will, for the foregoing. That's where we're at, I think.
I think we are too.
So, Doug, I wonder then, with that opening kind of setup here, if that does put us to, I notice that we're taking a slightly different than historical approach with these references in the document, which fans of the show, people who have followed us, will note that we tend to go pretty way back in the Wayback Machine for some of these references. That is definitely part of these references here. Make no mistake, constant viewer or constant listener, but we're deviating a bit in that we're not going from oldest to newest or what have you. Our first reference here from Kirschner, Hendricks, Paz, Waperis, and Cordwenner. Hopefully got all of those somewhat correct. 2004, Doug. Why don't you tell us a bit about that one?
So you, without even knowing, found my pattern. The way I normally do it, we've talked about this almost every episode, right? I go in the way back and find stuff. I did that here. Every one of these is in chronological order from when we covered it, when we had an episode on it. So I kept the same structure, but it just looks different because there is a much older one in here later. But so
Fantastic.
thank you for identifying that. I really
it's an Easter egg of sorts. Fantastic. Good job.
It really
pal.
is. We covered this way back when, and not covered, we talked about it. This is one of my favorite articles that I have ever read. And I even put that in the notes way back when. I think it was last January when we talked about it. And I went in and found something slightly different than what I looked at last time because I had 2 quotes from it because it was so good. I couldn't squeeze the essence of the whole article into 1 quote, but I'm going to do that now. So they conclude that the human factor is often considered as the most influential factor on the chances of failure and success. And I see that as so happy and so positive, especially in an age of AI slop, especially when it's, nope, here's the process, here's what we're doing, especially as we're getting away from things that are tried and true and we know work. In the era of doom scrolling, we're at the human factor is the most important factor. And to me, that just made me feel happy. It's people matter. And that's basically where the Kirschner et al. Article headed down because they talked about sustainable educational innovation. And I think we are desperately in the need of some more innovation. So I love the fact that it's about people. That's why we're here. Like if there was no education system because there was no young people or nobody wanting to change what they were doing, what would we do? We'd be, I don't know, doing something else. Farmers or carpenters or or something.
All of which would be extremely rewarding in their own way,
Oh yeah.
but without some means of sharing out that artisanal or technological or skill-based knowledge or whatnot, you really have to wonder where the human enterprise even would be without some formal or structural mechanism for sharing this stuff out in one way or another. I like your point of the desire for change as being foundational to the educational endeavor. And the human factor, I sort of think, okay, that's a really good way of putting it. I definitely appreciate how it is centering students, educators, seeing people as individuals, I suppose, rather than particularly abstract roles or things to be computed within spreadsheets or diagrams or planning or whatever. What, I guess, Doug, do you think of when you think of the human factor? When you think of what that variable looks like, what connotations come to mind? How would you express that term to somebody who maybe wanted a deeper or more clarified understanding of it?
for me, thank you for phrasing that question the way you did, because for me, I see the human factor as people striving, people wanting to do something better, or wanting to head in a direction in their life, or not just being crushed down and being a cog in a machine. I honestly believe that. And maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just my default mode. I'm a person that's constantly trying to figure out how to do something better. And don't get me wrong, I love a good spreadsheet because I like offloading that cognitive weight. It's like, why do I have to remember all those details? I'll just go read that. That's fine. Now, Socrates would have hated that. Socrates was not a person to do that, right? That was all oral. That was all away we go. So we've stepped past Socrates in some ways. But yeah, Socrates is like one in billions. But so that's a little different. But the whole concept of how do I strive to improve or make my life better or make other people's lives better or to work together, for me, it's all very utopian. And since this is the happy episode, I am striving for utopian. To the point that I have a question for you. Of all the sci-fi, I don't know if you're a big sci-fi person. Can you name the most utopian, like mainstream sci-fi franchise?
Well, I guess, first of all, Doug, I appreciate your answer to my question. I appreciate how you've really spoken to that directly. I have to say, if you're taking nominations for the phrase of the podcast, I really like your turn of phrase, offloading that cognitive weight. That to me just jumps out as like, wow, that is actually really salient to a lot of what we do in the ed tech sphere, the distributed, pardon me, cognition aspect, wherein you sort of clear up bandwidth by taking certain kinds of activities and placing them within the realm of a technological appliance or application or intervention or what have you. To name just an example, I can't think of very many phone numbers that I have memorized anymore, right? They're all within the purview of the algorithm or the settings on my mobile phone, just as a very, very basic example. Now, to speak to your question as to the most optimistic sci-fi franchise, honestly, the first that comes to mind is, with some qualification, Star Trek. I would have to say there are some iterations of the show. My mom is actually pretty deep into that franchise and all of its subsequent spin-offs. And there have been a few of the more recent shows where she kind of had to step away from it because it was too dark, it was too violent for her taste, where it seemed like the filmmakers for those shows were trying a little too hard to get with the current cultural zeitgeist or whatever. She found it a departure significantly from the original premise of the show back in the 60s through those early films. And I would say, even with the Next Generation show, again, some dark moments in there, but fundamentally an optimistic show. I don't know if you feel the same way, Doug, or whether you have something else in mind for yourself, but that's my, I guess, first answer that springs immediately to mind to that question.
Thanks. I agree with your mom wholeheartedly. And the only reason I bring it up is I've been on an optimism kick, right? I've been working at being positive and doing all that. And I just rewatched Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home. And this morning, as I was getting ready to record, I had this white Terry Fox t-shirt from the Terry Fox run, which is all about optimism. And I threw this vest on. And then I looked at myself in the mirror to comb my hair. And it's like, oh my. I looked in the mirror and thought, I look like Montgomery Scott. Like, I got the white beard. I've got the white shirt underneath, like the brown thing going on, and all I want to do is say like computer instead of using the mouse, right? There's a whole scene where he does the transparent aluminum thing, which I think is just hilarious. But I looked at it and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm turning into Montgomery Scott. And I see that as so happy. Because I always loved Scotty. I love that character. And the fact that that actor is Canadian was another thing on top of that. So that's why I headed there, because I think the Voyage Home movie was the best of Star Trek. That's all. I'm looking for happy everywhere, and I'm finding more and more of it. So it's amazing, right? If you look for it, you're going to find it. One of those things.
Absolutely so. And I got to also say that I appreciate your reference to Socrates. Socrates.
Yes.
He's absolutely, again, one of these people who we've talked about on the show before, who was highly influential, but there's various versions of his doctrines and of his lessons and of his teaching, because he never wrote these things down. And also, that is true of my pal Epictetus of the Stoic school. His surviving writings have all been orally transmitted. They were dictated by some of his more diligent pupils. And so a lot of these thinkers saw themselves as teachers in the first instance. And so if we're talking about the Platonic approach to education, or the Socratic approach to education, rather, where you set things up with a question which invites more questions, inquiry-driven learning can be traced back to these oral traditions, to these educators who really were strictly in their own lifetime, strictly within their own sphere of influence, trying to affect positive change by helping people come up with answers of their own volition, right? And you look at an educational enterprise, as it were, that goes back some thousands of years. We're talking, in the case of Socrates, going back to 500 BC or thereabouts. We're talking about the Star Trek huge franchise that goes back, at this point, closer to 100 years than to, say, a half of a century. And yeah, shouting out some prime Canadian content there. Gene Roddenberry, the original creator of the show, himself was from Toronto, I believe, a Canadian person. And so there's these through lines which the human condition, through its various eras, keeps finding these ways to manifest this not wanting but wanting to know. And truly, I think it's one of the things that makes humans a fairly unique experiment in the history of life on planet Earth as we know it, and probably will remain so, assuming we don't completely self-destruct or otherwise perish through ecological or cosmic calamity in the foreseeable future, which I suppose foreseeable future might be an oxymoron in that sense. But in any case, Doug, appreciate the reference to contemporary sci-fi and the through lines back to some of the themes we've explored in the show over the years.
And that leads us to the next article, the Gilbert 1996 article about supporting 50 classrooms full of whiz-bang technology.
Whiz-bang technology. We've used that expression on this show a few times before. You have. I like seeing it here in the title. I like seeing it here in the title of the reference. That's absolutely outstanding, my friend.
Hey, one of the key skills that academic people that are publishing have to do is have to have the ability to write good titles. Have to. But Gilbert says there's two major issues. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? And the fact that those questions are being asked is so great. And I just love, hey, let's talk about this. Let's put a spotlight on it and say, where do we want to be? What do we want to do? How do we set up the goals? How do we set up the roadmap? Who can we look at as an example, and let's make this happen? And I love the thought that goes into it, because I hate just the reactionary, oh, we got money to spend on this money line, or here's the latest whiz bang thing, or that company just paid to get their name on this building, so we're going to buy their stuff. And I love the fact that he said it out loud. Where are we going? How are we going to get there? Because for the most part, I believe that people are smart. I believe we can figure that out. So I'm just wondering about your thoughts.
Boldly go where no one has gone before, to use a tagline or an expression.
Yeah.
And honestly, that does put me in the mind of Epictetus a bit. And
Cool.
So if you'll just humor me here, I was looking at this earlier, and this kind of brings me to a quote. I actually referenced this in my share of the notes earlier this morning, so it's kind of on the front of my mind. But this whole notion of time, this whole notion of how are we going to get where we're going, because by default, that includes a notion of when, right? And so I'm going to just quote here from Epictetus, from the handbook, sort of the consolidated, the Reader's Digest version of some of his writings, as it were. And this is from the handbook 51, if anybody's playing along at home. And if you come up against anything that requires an effort, or is pleasant, or is glorious or inglorious, remember that this is the time of the contest, that the Olympic Games have now arrived, and that there is no possibility of further delay, and that it depends on a single day and single action whether progress is to be lost or secured. It was in this way that Socrates became the man he was, by attending to nothing other than reason in everything that he had to deal with. And even if you're not yet a Socrates, you ought to live like someone who does in fact wish to be a Socrates. So there's a whole lot there that I appreciate. The multiple Socrates showing up, the fact that this is somebody who was writing in the late 100s, early sort of second century era, looking back from an ancient standpoint to what we would consider an even more ancient standpoint. You want to carry yourself as somebody who's always trying to improve. And how do you do that? What's your method? What's your map for doing that? If you are devoted to a singular goal of self-improvement, of lifelong learning, perhaps within the paradigm of this show, then that was going to serve you, so that even if you don't reach the zenith, if you don't reach the ultimate of ultimates, still you're a lot farther along than if you were just kind of going about things on a day-to-day level, unmindfully or what have you. So that's kind of where that particular quote places me mentally here, Doug.
Oh, yeah, that ties in so well with what Gilbert was saying. So thanks for bringing the historic thing. I was going to have something much more mundane. It's when you go to the dentist and the dental hygienist is like, how often do you floss? If you just floss every day, that's such a good thing. It improves your life later, right? Simple path. Just floss every day. And how many people actually do it? There's research out there that says, here's why people don't. And it's like, that's not the conversation I want to have. It's how do we do it? It's a nice, simple step. So I know that's not Epictetus, but
no, that's good though, because I recall from my conversations with the hygienist, to use the example, wherein it sort of comes up that it's not just about reducing the amount of plaque that builds up between your teeth and thereby improving your teeth health. It's about preventing disease of the gums. And you think about how everything that enters your mouth ultimately passes through your esophagus. It gets turned into nutrients within your body. So good oral health is part of anything that would be involved with wellness, with the very frail, very fragile, very time-bound body, physical body that we occupy. And it's such a simple thing to do. So why not give yourself that gift of wellness by taking the moment each day to do this thing, which will have longer term, very tangible benefits to your overall quality of being, right?
Yeah. And I've hijacked that. And I've taken it to the next step, because I've read a thing that says as the older you get, fall risks become a thing. I am not old enough to need to worry about fall risks, but years from now, the plan is, yeah, I will be old enough to worry about fall risks. So one of the hacks people have is balance on one foot while you're brushing your teeth. You brush your teeth every day, so spend 30 seconds brushing your teeth and stand on one foot at the same time. So I do that, and it's like I've always struggled with that. Like I did the yoga instructor training, so I can actually teach a yoga class, and we've talked about that in the past. But balance poses on my right leg, I hate them. I don't have great balance on my right leg, and it's getting better because I take that 30 seconds to a minute every day, and it's not stopping me from doing the other stuff. It's just adding to what I already do. So where am I going? I want to be a person that doesn't have to worry about falling in 20 or 30 years. How are we getting there? I'm trying this. Does this help? And if not, who cares? It doesn't impact anybody else. It's not negative in my life. It gives me something to focus on other than just brushing my teeth, which is pretty mindless.
Autonomy and self-sufficiency are of such a premium value in your, what a lot of people would call final or declining kind of years, right? You have a sense as you get older, certainly I'm noticing this even in my late 40s, where my perspective on what's important, where I assign value, it's a lot different than when I was younger. It's reaching the point now where I value, for instance, a good night's sleep. I value having a very simple range of entertainment, a very straightforward diet. The sphere of things which carry influence from me is narrow, but there's a whole lot of variation, of minute but significant variation within those practices. So, for instance, your habit of one-legged toothbrushing is in fact conducive to neuroplasticity. It's conducive to building and reinforcing those receptors, which are physically and mentally going to serve you further down the line through using them appropriately now. It's a gift you can give yourself, right? Mindfulness is a word which is coming up again for me as I discuss this or think about this here with you, Doug. And so I appreciate the opportunity to speak to that. It seems like with these references, we are, as is the habit of the show over the years, going into multidisciplinarity, which is my perhaps none too subtle way of bringing up this outstanding reference from Martin Weller in 2018 from the Educause Review, where he's speaking to, I assume this is sort of in the period when the book was on its way out, but perhaps not published yet, the 20 years of ed tech, which we've spoken to at various points on the show since the show began, as a matter of fact. If I could throw that over to you, Doug, if we want to take it up from there, the quote and what you were thinking when you included that for this episode, my friend.
That was a very smooth on-ramp and introduction to that from where you were going. So good on you. Well done. Weller has a quote that says, EdTech is also an area where people can come from other disciplines, so there is no shared set of concepts or history. This can be liberating, but also infuriating. I have experienced both of those things. And I find it comes back to the motivation for why people come together, why people are involved in it. The self-promoters, the people whose name has to be first on the article when it's published, the people that are in it for their own glory to tick a box, I find those people infuriating. The people that are coming with an open mindset and want to help students and want to help their colleagues, that's liberating. And I'm focusing on the liberating part. That is where we need to go, because I'm just so tired of the negative and the other stuff and the balancing of egos. So I'm not even going to go there. It's just, isn't it great that we have a discipline where everybody can come together? And we just happen to have terminal degrees in that field. So if you look into it, that might be saying something about us too. Or if people have listened to the last 4 seasons worth of episodes, I think they might have picked up on that by now. But
Well, and speaking to the fact, as per Weller, that our field wasn't really recognized as much of a field per se when you and I obtained terminal degrees in that area. So on one hand, there's the challenge with a terminal degree of you've reached a level where the onus is on you to sort of clarify and explain your position and where you're coming from within the discipline. But then there's the fact that the discipline itself is so unwieldy and so relatively new. So it's not only the terminal aspect of it, which carries a certain weight, but it is the newness of it. And for all the self-aggrandizing, self-promoting mopes who, to use a term that I've encountered in managerial or administrative posts, I won't take it any further than there. But for instance, there are people who are legitimately trying to explore areas within this field and coming to it from perspectives which hopefully can enrich the field going forward and enhance the level of teaching and learning and production of knowledge, production of practice, documenting, testing of all this stuff, which trickles down, which has a significant benefit for students, for educators on the front lines, all of it. So the paradigm of the negative and the positive just being same from different handles, as it were. One handle makes a situation supportable, one handle makes it unsupportable. That's something else from Epictetus, a formulation of his, which I really enjoy. That is something which I see as being extremely salient to this quote. I like the notion too, by using the word liberation, and I thought of it when you were speaking there, Doug. It puts me in mind of the critical perspective which we try and bring, right? So, for instance, the pedagogy of the oppressed, the pedagogy
yes,
of happiness, all of these things which we've spoken to at various points throughout the show. Liberation, improving the circumstances of individuals through the educational endeavor. You have to have that as part of your motivation for being an educator in some way or other. Otherwise, what are you doing besides trying to draw a paycheck, right?
yes, the building upon part, not just the paycheck, but how do we improve? I find it exciting to be in ed tech over the last 20 odd years because it's a new field. You go back 200 years, nobody's a scientist. That term hadn't been invented. Back then, people were natural philosophers because they didn't know what to call it, but it was a specializing and they were heading in a certain direction. And they were absolutely ripping off the old Greeks and the old Romans, right? Because they were philosophers. And then we had the Renaissance and all that stuff. So literally, instead of being professors or academics or whatever the term is we want to use, even though we're both doctors, right? We could be natural philosophers in the field of ed tech. And I see that as so positive. I just love that concept. So when people say, oh, it's so new and people can come from everywhere, and well, 200 years ago, that's what was happening with all the sciences. How much was going on just because somebody had a rich patron or somebody just happened to be rich and was interested in trying to figure out X, Y, or Z? Yeah, that's what we're doing now. We're just following along in a grand tradition to make things better for people. So,
and as well, it just kind of puts me in the mind of during our summer hiatus, I did some reading on the history of technology's concept, right? Even outside the sphere of education per se, and the fact that technology has been a contested and emergent term, which still has a lot of epistemological softness to it, a whole lot of political fraughtness to it. So when you say education or you say technology, those terms can be very different based on who's saying them and to whom. And we live in so-called a technologically advanced age where, as a paradigm, we all recognize that this is a strong motivator, but some people would be thinking of industrial processes, others would be thinking of social media apps, others would be thinking of, well, anything that is abstracted from human knowledge as a craft or art form in any way is a form of technology. So you look at porousness within the field, which we've talked about variously on the show before. You have to think, well, what are even our basic principles? What are our basic understandings of what these key terms mean? Right? What does education mean to me as an individual? What does technology mean to me as an individual? So again, there's that tension, there's that friction there, and I appreciate the aspect of it that is, what do we say, liberating, but also potentially infuriating. If you're trying to come up with generalities, if you're trying to come up with universal principles, it's simply not really conducive to it, but it does for highly personal, at the highly granular, at the micro level, carry a lot of weight, I think, Doug.
yes. And one thing I love about how we're headed and what we've been saying leads into the next article, the Willis and Berner article. And it's not just individual people going off and doing their thing. There's learning, like I'm a social constructivist, I haven't hidden that, but teachers, learners, colleagues, it all goes together. You can't ignore the community that came before you. You are standing on the shoulders of giants, or as Dr. Nathaniel Ostashevsky says, you're leaning over the shoulder of giants. Because now in the computer age, right? Yeah, you're leaning over their shoulder to see what's on their screen. So when Willis and Berner is talking about their article, it's like the research on teacher morale and its effect on student achievement has been positively correlated. Because if you want to crush a student, be a cruddy educator, right? That is a way to just grind innovation and joy out of life. But if you're positive and you're a happy person and you're doing well and you feel enlightened and you feel like you matter and all of those positive things, that makes a difference for the students. That makes a difference for the people around you. And isn't that wonderful? And we can't get there individually. No man is an island. I'm just going to keep throwing out all of these standards.
Well, I love the positivity here. I love these euphemisms. I saw on a TV show recently that I'm watching, The Lowdown on FX with Ethan Hawke and some other notables. It's a noir show. It's set in Tulsa. It's a contemporary show. And the main character is this kind of journalist, but he also owns a bookstore, which is, I guess, part of why I've gravitated towards it. And it mentions itself a cliche, but the fact that cliches are cliches because they carry some very significant universal truth. And any of these bon mots that you're throwing out, any of these high kind of sounding phrases, I think are appropriate because they're in keeping with the show and they've been tested through the human condition variously over the years, right? So I think that's all very much to the good here, Doug, and I appreciate your throwing them out there. Quite frankly, I do love the pervasive positivity. And if anybody wants the other side of that, they only have to go back a few episodes on our website, analogtrope.ca/podcast, where they can check out the grievances of ed tech, which we've done at least a couple of times throughout the run of our show.
Yeah, I realize that when new stuff comes up, my first reaction can be no. Like it's no at the beginning, and then I think about it, and then I'm like, yeah, okay, I can do this. I can be part of this. I can, and I'm grappling with why is my first reaction no?
I have a theory around that. It's always easier to have a negative response, to have a no kind of response in the first case, because it's easier to walk back. You can walk back a no and flip that to a yes, because a yes response, you're sort of committed to something. It's perceived as, okay, I'm now involved in something that involves other people. Whereas you say yes in the first place, then you try and walk it back. It's like, well, what's this person doing? They don't know their own mentality. It's tougher because you've involved other people by assenting to a certain set of propositions. And again, as per Epictetus, as per our other Stoic philosophers who I'm awfully fond of, a lot of what the human gift is from God or the gods or however you want to look at it is we have the rational spirit and we can use that to make correct use of our first impressions, right? We can take the impressions that come in through our senses and other means and give proper assent to those. And I think to say no to something in the first place, I mean, yeah, you can always switch that out with a yes after giving it more deliberation. Whereas if you go with a yes response immediately, and then that's where buyer's regret comes from. That's where, man, that was hastily thought out. Fools rush in where angels fear to tread, right? So just to riff a little bit on what you're thinking there might be, Doug.
Yeah, my first year teaching, this was a while ago. I was teaching grade 5, and the grade 6 teacher, who happened to be my uncle, I ended up in the same school because that was in the glory days out west when there was jobs. But he told me, like, I don't even know if I'd been in a classroom. Like, I don't think the school year had started. It was in those meetings before the semester started. He said it's easier to be stricter at the beginning and then relax. If you go in too nice, it's really hard to get strict later and undo some of the slackness or the friendliness or the kindness or whatever the words were.
100%.
And so for me, the first couple of weeks, because I like to think that I'm a nice person, right? People keep telling me I am. So I was strict and then I relaxed and the students were cool with it. And there was one thing I wasn't strict about early on. And for the rest of that school year, it's like, oh man, I wore it. It was why was I so nonchalant and chilled out about this one thing? Because by April, May, it was driving me crazy. So it's that whole concept of, yeah, it is easier to. So instead of me instantly saying no, I'm working towards being non-committal. I want to start with non-committal, say, let me think about that. Give me time to buy myself the thinking time to make a decision. Because sometimes stuff comes up and you get on board and then it goes nowhere. And it's like, well, why why would I jump on board with that and do a bunch of work on it already if it really wasn't going anywhere? Let's wait to see if this has actually got any oomph behind it. So I'm working on not saying no instantly. And I realize that I'm doing it now. I'm trying to become self-aware. I continue to be another work in progress. So.
To not say no, a negative framed as a positive, or is that the other way around? In any case, I appreciate the formulation of that proposition. And I also have to say, I also very much appreciate anecdotes which involve your educator family, Doug, because folks, those who might not know from the show, Doug is an educator with a pretty serious family background, including parents, including at least one uncle, and indeed others in his family, both immediate and extended, who have taken up the cause of being an educator over the years. So that's part of a grander schema for you. That's part of a grander narrative informing your history with this stuff, Doug, which is always fascinating and interesting to me because I'm what you call a first generation teacher relative to my family lineage. So
and
thanks for
first
that,
generation
Doug.
is harder. First generation's always harder because you don't have that pattern. You may not have that built-in mentorship. You may not have that, oh, here's the example of what you need to do to find success. And it just is.
To speak to that, and it's not, I don't think, too much of a digression here. I completed the in-class component of my workplace CPR certification yesterday. So I'm officially CPR certified relative to the school that I work at part-time right now. And the instructor, it was mostly online, and I could speak to various aspects of that. But the part that's sort of significant for this conversation is the instructor who was overseeing the half of a day or full day, depending on what you signed up for yesterday. He's a 24-year-old man, so he's half my age. He's half my age, but he was thoroughly knowledgeable, thoroughly engaged. He knew various nuances well outside the prescribed curriculum. And part of the reason for that is he immediately started out by saying, I've been teaching CPR since I was 14. My dad was a paramedic. I have police officers, first responders, and nurses in my family. And that whole background has informed his practice. So he's been teaching this stuff, never mind practicing it, for a good 10 years. And this, I want to call him a kid, but he's not a kid. He's a grown man, but half my age. And I'm like, I am impressed. His level of subject matter expertise was beyond question, and it gave him the ability to extemporize, to speak outside the curriculum because he just had the curriculum down pat on a very practical level. And that, to me, as a learner in a completely new context, setting, subject matter for me, was very reassuring. And that sense of reassurance is, I think, in part, what we as learners really want to take away from the educational setting above and beyond, say, the knowledge per se. Because as we mentioned on the show before, it's that old cliche, right? You'll forget most of the time what people have said to you specifically in a lot of cases, but you will almost always remember how a certain individual made you feel. So that sense of confidence, that sense of self-efficacy, that human factor, if you will, is really a significant part of the educational endeavor, Doug.
Yes, and that goes back to the Willis and Werner. Yeah, we're still on Willis and Werner. So yeah, that article, you just hit the nail on the head with that.
And does that now clear us to go way back in the Wayback Machine to 1887 with this Laurie article, Doug?
Yes. I brought this Laurie article from 140 odd years ago back. And the quote is, music had originally included in all branches of intellectual and moral education.
I love
all departments presided over by the 9 muses. And I brought this back because I said yes to something in my personal life that I had forgotten. When I did my master's, University of Calgary, and I was the very first grad student of Dr. Michelle Jacobson, who's amazing. I've
it. She
raved
was
about
your supervisor.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that, Doug. She was a very significant person in my doctoral program. She wasn't my supervisor, but she supervised somebody who was one of my really close friends in that program and life. And yeah, Dr. Jacobson, absolutely fantastic educator in person.
Yes. And I was her first.
Wow.
So yeah, it was an interesting experience. I love her to death. She's amazing. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference and met some people from U of C, and we got to talking about whatever. And I said, "Hey, do you know Michelle Jacobson?" They're like, "Oh yeah, she's my supervisor, and I think she's so great." And she goes, "I can't wait to ring that bell." And I'm like, "What bell? What are you talking about?" And she had developed like a graduation ritual. And she had like, the old school bells, like the brass kind of things with the long handle, and you can ring the bell to tell the students to come in. That sort of old bell from whenever. Apparently her ritual is when a grad student finishes, they're allowed to ring the bell that she's got on her desk. And I'm like, "Oh, wow, that's cool." And then she said, that this lady I'm talking to said, "Wait a second, you're Doug." And I'm like, "What?" "Yeah, that's my name. I just introduced myself like 5 minutes ago." She goes, No. You gave Michelle the bell. She's got the bell because of you." And I was like, I have no clue what's going on. She goes, "Do you gave her the bell? Don't you remember giving her the bell?" I said, "I finished my master's, and 6 weeks later, I was in Australia doing a PhD, and I got rid of pretty well everything I owned." I said, "I got rid of a ton of stuff in that 6 weeks." I said, "But that sounds like something I would do. That absolutely sounds like it." And she goes, "Oh yeah, we can't wait. COVID's been so tough. Nobody's been able to ring the bell during COVID because we're all on lockdown and stuff." And then I reached out to Michelle and asked, and she's like, "Oh yeah, that's the bell you gave me. It's still got your," because I had taken Sharpie and written inside the bell so nobody could see it. But it just made me laugh that was there, and that was part of it. And I love the musical aspect of it, because with Michelle, like when I was finished in that 6 weeks, she had a campfire barbecue thing for all her grad students. And we sat around the campfire, and they handed a guitar around, and they handed it to me, and I don't play guitar. So I had to hand it off. And I said, "I never want to feel like that again. I want to be able to play guitar or play an instrument, just so I can play one simple little song, don't care what it is." And then at Christmas time, I said yes when the neighbors said, "Hey, come on over. We're having a little get together over Christmas." I normally don't do that stuff, or I'm normally the first one looking for the door. Anyway, it was the same deal. We were sitting around, and the guitar comes out, and I'm like, "Oh man, it's been 25 years or 30 years, and I still haven't learned how to play the damn guitar." So I've got the ukulele now, and I've got the didgeridoo, and I've got a tin whistle. One of those is happening, just so I can now not feel like that. So it just reminded me of this core experience and how handing the guitar off made me feel. And it's like, okay, I'm coming back to it. Everything goes in cycles. So sorry for that long-winded thing, but that's where the music quote took me from, to be optimistic. It's like, hey, I haven't got to that yet. Let's go. I still have more challenges, still more stuff I want to try.
Well, that's
Thanks.
Absolutely awesome, Doug. I appreciate so many aspects of that. I personally have a pretty deep relationship with music, even though I don't consider myself any kind of musician. I've never really had even much curiosity to take up a musical instrument. It was something where during my sort of formative teenage years, I played percussion pretty badly in middle school band, and I just kind of abandoned it. I was briefly a teenage beatnik, and I played the bongos in the public square a little bit, very briefly, very too much of the general public's annoyance, I think. But generally speaking, I have been a deep, committed fan of music, and I've found a way of sort of expressing the musicality, the feelings and sensations which accompany that in a written idiom. For me, poetry, prose, nonfiction, and the like have served as the ways that I can express those kinds of feelings and emotions and ways of being in the world, which a lot of people, as I understand, kind of inhabit when they're involved with music. By that same token, I can't imagine a life without music. Half of my tattoos, of which I have many, are in some way related to music. I'm always wearing some punk t shirt or other. This is the logo for the rock band Hot Water Music behind me because they're associated with the musical selection that goes along with this episode. And I remember, Doug, back by the third episode that we were involved in the show, I had experimented. I just said, well, let's call these episodes after a song, right? Just a musical number. And you were like, yeah, that's really good. We should keep doing that. And so now I consider it part of the identity of the show a bit. I consider it part of what differentiates this from, say, your standard quote unquote professional, strictly, or academic, strictly kind of podcast. And it speaks to part of the personal, informal, ad hoc nature, which as educators, we have to occupy when we're practicing our profession. So I think what you had to describe there, Doug, was very optimistic, very uplifting, very personal. Really like the opportunity to shout out Dr. Jacobson. I don't know if she's ever listened to this or if she's ever gonna, but what an outstanding committed educator who's had an immeasurable impact at the high academic level in her practice at the University of Calgary over at this point multiple generations of people who are doing bachelor's, master's, and PhDs and the like, right? So,
Oh yeah. And at one point, she was the associate dean. She's done a bunch of different roles in that faculty, and just one of those amazing people. Just that is a positive in my life to be able to reach out and have a relationship with her whenever I feel like sending her an email. It's just awesome. So I have one last article because I know we're getting close. And it's Stancil 2021, and it's about educator acculturation. And it boils down to flourishing can be linked with acculturation. And acculturation provides growth opportunities. So if you want to be positive, figure out a way to hang out with positive people or be in a positive environment. If you want to say no instantly, right, that's easy. It's the joy of the acculturation and the flourishing. Do you want to flourish? Here's how you flourish. Here is the path to flourishing. And I know it sounds very new age influencer-y. I don't know if that's a word, but how can we acculturate into some place where we can flourish? How do we put ourselves, how do we make our habits, how do we make our environment positive for everybody? Because for me, I'm looking at positive now. So that's my thoughts on why I presented this. And it was somebody's doctoral dissertation. And I love publishing little chunks of people's dissertations because it's so different than what you have to write to get in a journal.
100%. And when I was putting the notes into the WordPress format for our website, I really smiled when I saw that the final reference for this episode is the doctoral dissertation. Very much like you, it's just an awesome thing to be able to shout that out, because you know from firsthand experience how much passion and effort and sweat and hardship goes into reaching the point where you put that out. It's a passion project, and like any other. I also like the fact, Doug, that you've chosen a selection here which speaks to the overseas teaching experience, where I can truthfully say that
Yeah.
nothing I've done as an educator would be the way it is without that experience. And for sure, that's the same for you with your time in Australia. And furthermore, that sense of well-being, that sense of flourishing, that puts to my mind, again, to shout out the Stoics, this notion of eudaimonia, which is a Greek word, which is kind of considered the highest ideal among the Stoic philosophers, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and others, where it's just a sense of well-being, a sense of being trouble-free, a sense of feeling calm and happy and secure in your surroundings, whatever those surroundings may happen to be. So the notion of even being content while on the rack, while being under torture by, say, the imperial guard or whatever in ancient Rome in the despotic times or whatnot. So there's a lot there that really resonated for me, Doug. And I feel like on this very optimistic topic, we could probably go a lot further, but perhaps for the constraints of time, we can kind of tie it off there, except, of course, for some discussion of the visuals here, of which, as always, you've made some really excellent selections, Doug. So are we ready to speak to those yet?
Sure. Yes, we are. Sorry about that. I have my digital clutter was crazy this week, and we can do an episode on positivity and happiness and education and stuff at some point. This was really the wrap up where I spent the year trying to be positive. Have you ever watched the animated TV show Archer?
Nope.
There's it's what, 15 years ago now? They did 10 seasons, and it was about a spy and this little spy agency, and the guy was just a spoiled brat, a really good spy, but a spoiled brat, and his mom ran the agency. And every time something got spilt on the floor, it's like, do you want ants? Because that's how you get ants. And that just was one of those things, right? Whenever something got spilled, like he was one of those James Bondy kind of spies. So it's like whenever you spill alcohol on the ground, do you want such and such? That's how you get such and such. And so the first picture, the picture that I really loved and wanted to put in there, is an area that looks like it's been clear cut, trees that have been clear cut. And it's just the mom, the one that ran the agency, saying, do you want ents? Because that's how you get ents, as a reference back to Lord of the Rings. And we are Ent. We are the Ed Non-Tech podcast. So I just really enjoyed the positivity of that. It's like, oh yeah, that's the path you want? Okay, that's the path you're going to get. Because if things
and there is and there is in fact a second reference to Tolkien, right? Because for those who have been following along, you'll note that Ents, the tree people, as it were, are of the Lord of the Rings universe, a la J.R. Tolkien. And you have a very, I think, significant, poignant quote here from Tolkien included in the digital clutter, so to speak here, Doug.
Yes. And it's about what is escapism and what isn't. Like fairy stories have traditions across cultures, across all the cultures. People have fairy stories. They're not escapism. It is not a fugitive. It's not running away. It's about sudden and miraculous grace. And I think that's something that I'm trying to lean into. It's not saying bad stuff doesn't happen or doesn't exist. It's like, no, It's there. We're recognizing it, but we're choosing to go in this direction for these reasons. And I see it all about like fleeting glimpses of joy. I'm a big fan of finding some joy in stuff, regardless of what's going on. Let's focus on the happy. Let's focus on the joyful rather than just getting mired in the doom scrolling of grief to numb our senses.
Doom scrolling of grief. Oh my God, Doug, you have had some very, very choice words and phrases here, I have to say. I just, that's, as you say that, right? Offloading that cognitive weight, that's something that jumped out at me earlier that you mentioned. Doom scrolling of grief, I think that's another. Doug, I think you've really had some very excellent turns of phrase, which is not unusual at all, but they've really resonated, I think, within the context of this decidedly optimistic show. Are we ready here, my friend, to speak to the word, question, and phrase of the podcast?
There's one more picture I need to
Please
highlight.
do.
It's the very last picture on the shared document, and it should look like a coffee table.
Yes.
For longtime listeners, I took apart my coffee table in April, and I have slowly been rebuilding it with wood that fell during Hurricane Fiona. The coffee table now is back in my living room, and there's proof that it holds stuff.
Is that
off
your
the ground.
so that's your very coffee table in your very living room?
Yes, and I got it done before Christmas because the trees in the background. But
fantastic.
Yeah,
there's a lot that I liked about that picture.
Yeah,
even without knowing that, there's a lot that I liked about that picture.
Thanks. So we have the chess set. Like I made a chess board. Each one of those little pieces is an individual piece of maple. And we already have the chess pieces from the Isle of Lewis when we were in Scotland a couple of years ago. And so we'll be able to play chess there. And there's stuff I learned, stuff I procrastinated on. I am not a fan of the clear coat finish that I used. It didn't react with the wood and the stain the way I wanted, but I'm being optimistic. It's there. I like it. I'll grow to love it again. And there you have it. So I needed to bring that up as proof that I promised not to talk about the coffee table ever again on the podcast. I will find other random projects to talk about instead. So
it's one of your numerous accomplishments, and we are always here to celebrate success. So congrats, my friend.
Thanks. It is so nice to have that bit of Flotsam off my desk and off my brain.
Absolutely.
So, word of the podcast is Flotsam because that's what we talked about. We spent the whole episode talking about goods that were floating on the surface and could be reclaimed, and we just reclaimed some of them. The question is, what Derelict, Lagan, Jetsam, and Flotsam would the audience like us to address more in a future podcast? And for longtime listeners, I ripped off the exact same question 4 times now, because how do you get feedback, right? It's not us in a bubble. It's what do people want? Now, the phrases of the podcast, holy crud, we have a bunch. And thank you for identifying some of mine, because I wasn't good at that. Additionally, I dare to add, which I found that encapsulates this entire podcast. Like this whole series, this 4 seasons of podcast is, additionally, we have dared to add. That's what we do. We are adding to the zeitgeist. We are saying, here's a direction to go. Here's the path, the journey on, and that's yours. You also brought up the word enterprise a whole bunch of time, and I assume it's because I dressed like the character Montgomery Scott in it, but you mentioned the human enterprise over and over and over, and Enterprise is the name of the starship in the show. I had 2 as well, so thank you for identifying them. The offloading that cognitive weight and doom scrolling of grief. So that's where we're That's where we're at. That's what I have to offer today.
Well, fantastic, Doug. And appreciate you as always. Appreciate anybody who's checking out the show whatsoever for any reason whatsoever. Hope that the 2025 period was better for you than not. And we hope that the 2026 era is off to a fine start for you, one way or the other, however you may find yourself and where and however. I don't really think I have anything else to add to that, Doug. I think probably that's it for me. Anything else you wanted to throw out here, my friend?
Nothing. I hope everybody had a wonderful time and are looking forward to the rest of season 4 in 2026.
Awesome. Well, take care, everybody. It's been a slice, and bye for now.
Bye bye.